Hello, lovers. I'm Coach Bo, and this is another installment of Sexy Time, Storytime, my exploration of desire, pleasure, intimacy, satisfaction, and love, especially but not exclusively for those of us who are neurospicy. Today's question is there a scientific way to find a soulmate? Now, I will also, for a second, ignore the things that I think about soulmates, which I will probably share in a different episode. But essentially, spoiler alert, I believe that finding your soulmate occasionally is kryptonite because I found my soulmate and he was an asshole. And I loved him very much and probably still love him today, but it wasn't a good life choice, if you know what I mean. We'll get to that another time. For today's discussion, though, I do want to talk about what science is about finding a soulmate, because as it turns out, there is a neurology that exists that could potentially help you figure out who your soulmate is, or help you figure out if the person you're with is your soulmate, right? If a soulmate, by the way, is what you're looking for. Now, one of my favorite people working in the field of sex, relationships, love, etc., is Dr. Helen Fisher, who I will reference quite a lot in these discussions. She is a social anthropologist and also the chief scientific officer for Match.com. So she knows what she's talking about when it comes to these things. She wrote a book which is called Why Him, Why Her, which kind of goes into why do we pick the specific people we pick, right? Because there are many people that might potentially fall in within the parameters of someone we find attractive and also we could see a life with, especially since I think science, and in particular psychology and sociology before, have talked about being attracted to people with similar backgrounds, similar socioeconomic standing, similar education, that look robust for propagating the future of our species in some cases. Um, and that is all kind of widely known. But I wondered, and certainly Dr. Fisher wondered, about whether there was something more at play than just those obvious biological traits, and whether, in fact, there could be something about our neurology that contributes to who we find and why we find them. She has the luxury of having access to thousands of people through her work, I suppose, with Match.com, but I have no idea. But being able to really poll many people to find out about what they're looking for, why they look for what they look, etc. Of course, a lot of the research is in the US, so I guess we take it with that caveat. But I think it is generalizable to the general population, considering it's about neurology and neuroscience rather than it is about sociology and culture. So, what does Dr. Fisher say? Essentially, there are four types of people, right? The first type is explorer, the second type is negotiator, the third type is builder, the fourth type is director. Don't read too much into the labels, that's just what they're called. Now, the explorers are particularly active in the dopamine system. So, this doesn't mean that they have a lot of dopamine or that they are producing more dopamine than others. It's really reflecting the part of the brain that does dopamine. These people are very active there because there's a lot of activity and there's a lot of neurotransmitters that are making dopamine like a vibe, for lack of a better word. These people are really super curious, they're adventurous, they're trying to explore new things, find new things. And what they're looking for might not necessarily be a soulmate, to be honest. They might be looking for a playmate, someone to really enjoy and savor life's experiences and life with. And what would be best for them in terms of finding their ultimate playmate soulmate is probably going to be another explorer. Because the worst thing for an explorer is probably going to be someone who's going to thwart their creativity, who doesn't have the same appetite for risk as they do, who doesn't have the same appetite for adventure as they do. And so it makes a lot more sense for them to try to find someone who is alike with them in the way that they see the world. So that's explorers' dopamine system. Then we end up with negotiators. Negotiators are more idealistic. They're more interested in abstract theory, in thinking about things in a very broad and expansive way. They see the bigger picture. And here they have, we see that they have a lot of activity in the estrogen part of the brain, right? And in that particular brain system, again, doesn't mean they have more estrogen than anyone else. And I think at this point, it's also worth pointing out that estrogen exists in men and women and non-binary people and everyone who's along that sexual gender spectrum. This is not to say that men who are negotiators have more estrogen or are somehow more feminine or more female. That's not what it means. In the same way that when we get to the testosterone, it doesn't mean that the women who belong to that group and that category of people also somehow have more testosterone or more manly or whatever, right? It is really about that part of the brain is just more active. There's more neurotransmitters, neuroreceptors, whatever. It creates more of a estrogen vibe. Back to the negotiator. So negotiators actually are looking for a soulmate. They're looking for that love connection, that romance, and something that really brings out for them all the nuance of the world and all the emotions of the world, right? Estrogen isn't necessarily something that makes you more emotional by default, but there is a belief that, people who experience more estrogen than not certainly have a emphasis on, let's say, feeling. If you're interested in MBTI, the Myers-Briggs test, this puts you more of an F than a T, right? And for these people, they're trying to find their opposite. They're trying to find someone who will give them balance in their life, balance out their perspectives, balance out their idealism, someone who will ground them essentially. And so they're looking for more of a managerial or director type, which I will get to as the fourth type. But that is the opposite. Spoiler alert, negotiators are estrogen, directors are testosterone. Nonetheless. We then get to the third type, who are builders. Now, builders actually are super interested in family. They're really interested in duty and in making sure that the person they end up with is a lifelong friend. That's actually what they're looking for, more than the romance of a soulmate. They want someone that they can kind of build a long-term friendship and life with. And so any relationship they have is going to be based on the foundation of this is starting a family with this person, whether they're consciously thinking about that or not. They're mostly active in the serotonin part of the brain. And so that brain system for them is feeding them a lot of positive reinforcement for the idea that the person they're looking for should be someone who is their friend, right? And this creates a lot of stability in their lives as opposed to the explorers who are all about instability, adventure, etc. It shouldn't be considered as something that's boring because, to be honest, without the builders, we wouldn't really be able to continue society, right? Because we do need some people who want to create family units, however that may look for themselves, who want to pair bond with people, and who are interested in maintaining long-term cohesion, at least long enough to raise our young. For a builder, then, the perfect person is another builder because they have the same ideals, they have the same value, and the way that they want to live the life that they have in their mind will align with another builder better than it might, for example, with an explorer who just wants to have fun, be a nomad, live their best lives. Builders have a very different idea of what that best life would look like. And the last group is the directors. Now, the directors are more analytical, they're considered more methodical, and they're considered also, as opposed to the negotiators who think big, directors really zoom in and are able to get to the details of something. So where the negotiator might be up here in terms of breadth of a subject, the director is always going to be going down here in terms of depth of the subject. And what they're looking for is an intellectual sparring partner, I guess, for lack of a better word. They're looking for a complement. They're looking for someone who's going to add a missing piece to their life, but also not be a fit in their life so much as an add to their life, right? They're looking for a culture add, if you want to use some corporate terms. And so for them, beings that they are so analytical, so methodical, and sometimes miss the bigger picture and some of the other dimensions that kind of go into things, being more on the T scale than the F scale, if we go back to MBTI, they should be looking for a negotiator, right? Because a negotiator is someone who's going to open up their worldview and expand their way of thinking and being in a way that best complements there. This is a case of kind of the opposites attract situation, and it works out for quite a lot of people. So essentially, what we're saying when we ask the question, why him, why her, whether there's a scientific basis for finding your soulmate, really you are going with him or her or them because they give you what you want in exchange for what they want, right? The explorers want more dopamine, they want more fun, they want more adventure. Someone who's able to give them that, perfect. The negotiators, they're trying to get to understanding the big picture that they see and getting clarity on that, finding a soulmate to do that adventure with, right? That's why they're opposite the director makes sense. Builders are trying to find stability, family, live with duty, integrity, loyalty. And so other builders are going to help them do that. And directors, we know, are looking for a negotiator, someone who's going to help them expand their worldview and push them a little bit intellectually and in search of more ambition, interesting life, a better life, etc. That's going to be the negotiator. And thinking about it this way, you can also think about how the people in your life might fit into these and what the dimensions of your relationship with them are going to look like. I am very clearly an explorer as my primary type. I definitely live for adventure, exploration, curiosity, all the good things. That can sometimes be to my detriment, by the way, because explorers also have a much higher risk taking, let's say, profile than the others. And they are likely to do things on the spur of the moment with complete kind of abandonment or for the sake of a good story that may end up being counterproductive to the kind of life that they really should be leading. So, not great, but something I recognize about myself. I should also say that everybody has two of these types, right? Because, of course, every one of us is going to have some aspect of all of these things because, they're just systems in the brain and we all have all of them. But you will have two that particularly kind of stand out, a primary one and a secondary one. So for me, my primary one, very clearly the explorer, very clearly dopamine. And my secondary one is the negotiator, estrogen, right? I should point out that I was very similar in my scores for estrogen and testosterone, which, to be honest, makes sense because even in MBTI, I am very much kind of switching between the T and the F in terms of thinking and feeling, and very proud of being a person who values EQ and IQ pretty similarly. But if I have to think about the way my brain works, I am more interested in making unusual connections and exploring intellectual ideas rather than getting to the details and thinking about facts and figures. So negotiator kind of won out. Which means that for me, there is the option to, of course, find another explorer because that's what my primary kind of love type says. But there's also the option for me to go with a director, right? Because that would be feeding something that's in my secondary brain system, a love type, and that has the potential to work out too. I suppose that the best match, though, for that kind of person, and I think Dr. Fisher points this out as well, is probably another explorer and the director, right? Because you are able to meet both of those things at the same time. You could have a situation where it's an explorer and a builder who kind of come together with someone who's a negotiator and a director. The permutations of these, they all work, to be honest. There's nothing that's kind of a better match in the sense that for all of these relationships, they will all take work to make them work. They will all take conscious effort. And I was reading something yesterday, which I thought was really amusing, which is if CEOs worked as much on their business as people work on their relationships, most businesses in the world would be bankrupt. And I kind of agree with that. Just because the person is your soulmate, your playmate, your complement, your lifelong friend, whatever you want to call it, does not necessarily mean that that relationship will last or will sustain if you don't put the work into making it last and sustain. So all of these types can fit together, but of course, some of them are going to be easier, let's say, to sustain and much more aligned to what you want to do. So think about for yourself. I believe that there is a bunch of these tests. If you look for love types test or the neuroscience of love, or try to go into Dr. Fisher's website, I'm sure that you can find the test. It's also in her book, Why Him, Why Her, which I highly recommend. And you can then take the quiz for yourself and figure out where you are. Ask some of the people in your life to take the quiz. I don't know if you want to have that kind of therapy, Jeff, kind of awkward, spicy conversation with your partner about which type they are, because you may find that you don't particularly like the answer, or it gives you doubt. It's kind of like astrology in that way, right? You'll read into it what you want to read into it. So be sure that you're ready for whatever message comes to you as a result of that. But it is an interesting thing to look at for me in a kind of prospective sense when you're dating and when you're courting people, when you're seeing people and trying to work out, is this person going to be right for me? It makes sense then to try and find someone who aligns to your love type and who aligns to your neurology, someone who's going to give you what you want in exchange for what they want, which ultimately that exchange of ideas, values, resources, relationships, networks, fluids. That is the essence, I believe, of all relationships. Whether they're your soulmate or not, I think kind of irrelevant. But as it turns out, science does have an answer onto who the ideal love type for you might be. And go forth and find them, I guess. Thanks so much for joining me for another bit of my sexy time, story time. Hopefully, I will see you again for the next one.